Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our research and discovery grand rounds today. We're going to get started momentarily, just waiting for just a couple more people to join and for our links to finally connect. While we're getting ready for our presentation, I want you to make sure to look at your screen and make sure that you block out the date. Actually, looking at the wrong screen. I want you to, yeah, there it is. I want you to make sure you block out the date for our next research and discovery grand rounds on September 22nd, where we are very privileged to have Dr. Marie Bernard from the NIH present to us on scientific workforce diversity. So be sure you block that out. That's going to be, that should be a fascinating presentation. Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and get started for today. Thank you again for joining us. I am very pleased to introduce our speakers for this presentation today, where we're going to talk about the Frontier CTSI pilot program for translational research. With us today, we're delighted to have Dr. Bill Brooks, the director of the Hoagland Biomedical Imaging Center and professor of neurology at the University of Kansas, Dr. Nihar Nayak from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he's professor and vice chair for research in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and Dr. Natalia Loskutova, our project director for Frontier CTSI, and the go-to person when you have any questions related to this program, as you'll finally find out during the course of this presentation. But without any further ado, I think, Dr. Brooks, you're going to get us started.
Sure. Do I need to share again?
You need to share screen, just like you were before.
How's that?
It is perfect. Thank you so much.
Oh, only perfect is what I strive for. Let's see if I can get rid of some of this extraneous stuff. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for the chance to talk about the pilot program that we've been running through Frontiers for several years, as many of you know. As Ed pointed out, this really is a teamwork. I've had great support from both Natalia and Nihar. It's been great to work with, have a partner at another institution to get a different perspective of how a pilot program can work. And we've really learned a lot over the last year or so. So let me just move on. Let's see. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of a framework for what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about some of the priority areas that we think about, funding levels, who's eligible to apply, and then we're going to go through the process a little bit, and then some of the post-award responsibilities for those people who are successful enough to get funding. And I'd be happy to take, I don't know whether we run this as a live interactive effort, Ed. I'm happy to take questions on the way if things are not clear, or we can keep them to the end.
Yeah, well, I think I'll monitor the chat, or in the Q&A,
Okay.
And so if people have questions, if they could type their questions into the Q&A or drop them into the chat if they want everybody to see them. I'll interrupt you if there's an issue that needs to be clarified right away.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Ed. So one of the first things to think about is why are we doing this? And we have this whole concept of clinical and translational research. And the way we think of it at Frontiers is based largely on what our funding agency, which is the National Center for Advancing Translational Science, proposes. And that's described here on this slide. We are mostly interested in the T1 through to T4. So we're interested in translating basic discoveries into humans, translating those findings into patients, then into practice, and ultimately into community. We want to know what happens at the end. Does the initial discovery and the implementation make a difference to public and population health? One of the other key pieces to keep in mind is the difference between translational research and translational science. And there's an increasing role at NCATS, increasing view at NCATS that they are not necessarily there to fund research into individual disease. What they're interested in is funding and facilitating research and the research of doing research better. So that's what we call translational science, understanding the scientific and operational principles underlying each step of the process. So that's one of the things to bear in mind when people are writing applications. Is it's not so much thinking about what specific disease or disease that's being treated or drug that's being developed, but how can we make it applicable to a wider range of process. The priority areas for Frontiers, that's our local group, and I'll get into who are the partners in the Frontiers program on a later slide, are summarized here. But we're interested in processes and programs to understand, support, and advance translation. We want to improve, do data-related improvements and tools. We want to support improvements in tools for clinical research, improvements in tools for clinical study recruitment. We certainly want to support community and stakeholder engagement with a view to improving diversity and inclusion in studies. And ultimately, we want to have better methods to measure impact on health across the board. That said, so that's a pretty wide remit, and you can see here a broad summary of the topic areas that have been funded by our program. On the left-hand side, you can see the keywords that come up time and again across all of the applicants through our letters of intent, and you can see there's a wide range of diseases and activity represented there. On the right, there is a similar word cloud resulting from the actual awards that we funded. And again, you can see that we've been funding across a wide range of diseases, but also in things like informatics and across and genomics, for example. I said I'd tell you about the partners and the eligibility here. On the right panel, you can see the partners who are part of Frontiers. All of these investigators, faculty member investigators from all of these institutes are eligible to apply, so long as they are eligible to receive federal funding and they're employed by our Frontiers partner institution. I'll tell you a little bit more about the letter of interest stage of the application, and that's where we can clarify whether an individual, most people are going to be eligible if they're a faculty member and they work at one of these institutions. But on occasion, there's a few people in the community who don't quite meet those criteria, and we deal with those on a case-by-case basis as to whether we feel like they're eligible. So if you are interested in applying for these, please reach out to the pilot program when you're ready. The details will be on a later slide, and we can clarify whether you'll meet criteria for this mechanism. We are, per the funding opportunity from NCATS, we are largely focusing on early career investigators. That is our priority. But that doesn't mean we are not going to support more established investigators. They have some specific additional requirements that they need to meet. For example, it would need to be a project in a new area, a new initiative. It can't just be more of the same work that they've been doing for the last 10 or 20 years. You can apply multiple times, but again, there are some requirements associated with that. Firstly, it would need to be a new area of investigation, and also we would expect you to provide us a justification of what you had done with the previous funding and how that was successful and how that led to advancing clinical and translational research. And we are enthusiastic to include community partners. And this is still somewhat of a work in progress, but we certainly want community partnerships in applications from more traditional applicants, investigators. But in principle, there is a possibility for community partners to lead projects. And that's, as I said, a work in progress of how we're going to implement that. But we want to hear about ideas that people have to contribute to the overall themes of the program. Let me tell you a little bit more about the actual funding. So for the last 3 years and for the foreseeable future through the next funding cycle, we have funding for 3 times 3 of 50K annual awards. These awards are truly 1 year. They finish at the end of our funding year, which is I can't remember. It's in July, 31st, 30th of July, or something like that. But that's a detail we can sort out later. And so far we've on certain years we've had a little bit more money available to us from various sources, and so that's allowed us to, over those 3 years, actually fund 15 awards at $50,000 each. To get those awards, we received a little over 120 letters of interest. You can see on the right the representation of the partner institutions who have been funded. As you can see, Children's Mercy is leading at present, but we are cognizant of the fact that we want to fund investigators across all of our partner institutions. And so part of the final selection process does include a consideration of representation of the partners. But as you can see, it's not all focused in one particular institution. What does the application process look like? So I'll go into the details, but it's actually quite a long process. Let me start at the end. The funding can start no earlier than the date we get our notice of award for each funding cycle. So typically that's around 1st of July. But of course, we have little control over that. The funding NCATs send their notices of award when they're ready to do it. And sometimes that can take a little bit longer, but that's the general target. And as I said, the end of it is the end of that funding period, which will be the end of July the following year. But to get there, we have several major steps. I'm not going to go through all of the details in the flow chart on the right. These slides will be available to you, and anybody who wants to drill down into that can certainly look at that more closely. The key timelines are that our RFA and the opening of receipt for letters of interest will occur in mid-fall, usually in sometime in November. And then soon after, somewhere around the end of the year, the selected applicants will be invited for a full proposal. So it takes us a little bit of time to review those letters of intent. As I've mentioned before, on average, we get about 30 to 40 letters of intent. We'd be happy to have more. And we look at those for how they meet certain selection criteria that we have, including the thematic relevance of the application to our interests. So that takes a little bit of time. The merit review, so the applications are generally going to be submitted in mid-spring, and we will then undergo a merit review that includes representation from all of our partner institutions to select the final applications that we're going to propose for funding. One of the challenges we have is that there's an extra step for this funding mechanism in that the NCATs needs to have, they need to do an approval process, which takes a month or two. And so there's a certain amount of dead time even after we've made our merit review and selection of the final award recipients. So that's a process that the successful applicants have to go through. And of course, we walk you through that through our system. Let's see. So what does Frontiers offer for an applicant? Firstly, you get access to all of the cores. So if you need bioinformatics or statistics, For genomics, you can, as an applicant, you can reach out to the cause and get initial consultation to help you prepare your application. All of that is part of the process that we expect you and want you to take part of. And we're encouraging investigators to be wide thinking in terms of the range of disciplines that they involve in their studies, particularly using our cause. Through the review development process, we also provide support on team composition. One of the things we've found over the years is that investigators will often have good ideas, but they haven't necessarily thought as widely as they might about how they could incorporate input from scientists with expertise further along the translational pathway. So we want you to be forward thinking about how a project that you're doing not only is going to support the results from the pilot study, but how it's going to support future R01 applications or whatever other funding streams you're looking at in the longer term. And if it's, associated with developing a drug or a device, we also want you thinking about, what are the next steps after the initial conceptualization and proof of principle? How is that going to be translated into population health outcomes? We do have a program to help with grant application editing. We have a navigator in the Central Frontiers Central Office, who can help you with not only with the writing in expression, but also in terms of how you've presented the conceptual construct of that application to make it appealing. And part of that is to ensure that there is not only a scientific component to the application, but also a community layperson level of communication. And that is also facilitated through a consult that every finalist will undertake with our patient and community partner group. This is a group of volunteers from the community. They represent patients, family members, and other community members, underrepresented minorities, for example. And they meet monthly and they can provide here to direct input onto how you're presenting and communicating your ideas, how you're thinking about recruiting diverse populations, and the like. And we found those to be very popular, and the applicants to date have been very supportive of that. Also, it's a way for you to learn better how to present ideas to a broader community.
Bill, I want to interrupt you here because we did have a question in the chat, and it was one I was actually going to ask too. I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on this, because you're describing this this core support, the grant application editing, the use of the community partner group, other resources. Is this just available? So when does this become available in the pilot grant application process? Is it just available for pilot grant applicants? Or is this something that is this something that's available for anybody in the CTSA network, but you're actually just helping your pilot grant applicants walk through the process of taking advantage of Frontiers resources?
Yeah. Thanks, Ed. No, in principle, these are all available to any partner, any investigator at a partner institution, regardless of whether they're applying for a pilot project or not. So you don't have to apply for a pilot project to get access to these resources. The only limit would probably be on the patient community and partner group, and that is purely a bandwidth challenge. But if anybody wants support, help reaching out to a community group, contact us. We will help you find that support one way or another through the Frontiers program. But all of the other activities are there available for anybody who is writing a grant application or thinking about a new project that they want to develop. Does that answer it?
I think that's it. And I think it can be a little bit confusing because I think there's a lot of resources available here. We are in the process, I think, of revamping our website. Natalia may elaborate on this in a little bit. There's navigators that can help people access each of these in each of these domains.
Yeah.
But
I will add these resources are available for free while you're writing the grant application. So if you need a biostats consult to develop a study design for a project, that is part of the Frontiers funding. But once the application is written, you'll develop a budget that will include support for biostatistics or informatics or recruitment support. So those are still budgetable costs into the application. So that's the way to think about it, is that these are freely available to get the grant application submitted, but they are budget items in a final successful grant.
Great, thank you so much.
But yes, and just to close off, the question, the real issue is, and we'll give you the contact information at the end, is if you have questions about how to access any of these and whether you can access them, just call Natalia, contact Frontiers Central. One way or another, we will get you the information you need. Okay, so the review and selection process we've talked a little bit about. We essentially use an NIH review process. All applications, full applications go out to three reviewers who have content expertise of one form or another associated with the project. We're moving towards including community member reviewers as well. And so that's an important piece that is evolving and fairly new. And those reviewers are spread across the partner institutions. So one of the things we're going to talk a little bit more about is the need for partner institution reviewers. We want to have a wider pool of investigators who can provide help with the review process. One good news is that if you are an applicant, we don't ask you to review any grants in that cycle. So there's an incentive to write a grant application because you won't be on the review panel. But as I said, we do need more reviewers. It's always a challenge to get quality reviews done and by people who are enthusiastic and knowledgeable in the field. There's a survey that will be in the slides at the bottom of the slide here that will is where you can sign up to be a reviewer in the past. We typically only ask people to write, to review no more than 3 applications in any cycle. So it's not a heavy burden. These are not long applications. They're only about 4 or 5 pages of the science material, plus all the biosketches and other materials like that. But please sign up for reviewing. Okay, I mentioned earlier that there is an added level of review for each human subject or vertebrate animal study that we are seeking to fund, and that has to go back to NCATS to do that. So this is things like having your IRB or your IACUC either an approval letter or a letter that determines that this is not human subject research, so you don't need to go through the full process. There's also things like enrollment plans that need to be submitted. But again, we have Maria Hondras is the team member who actually facilitates all of this, and she has a well-structured system for acquiring all of this information. Because of this time requirement, we do expect you to have submitted or have in hand an IRB or an IACUC protocol. So it doesn't have to be fully functional, implemented, but it does need to have been applied by the time you submit the full application. But that's only for people with the full applications, not for people who are submitting letters of interest. Let's see, post-award. Yes, there's always going to be some post-award responsibilities. We do need to have midterm and final reports. The midterm is mostly to make sure that you're on track, that you've got all of the pieces established. Especially since these are no more than 12-month funding periods, we need to ensure that the project will finish by the end of the funding dates. And that's a hard date. There is no carryover provisions in NCATS for these funding, so we can't go into a no-cost extension. And so we want to make sure that not only are you reaching your recruitment targets and your study goal targets, but also that you're spending the money, because we can't carry it over to the next year. We do want to make sure that you're following up on your commitments through the community outreach input that you received, that you are disseminating results to your stakeholders, either through actual presentations to the public or through developing the plans that you're going to use in the future. We do expect you to cite frontiers in publications, not surprisingly. We do want you to give us program feedback, both on the application and also how it has worked for you through the funding cycle. And ultimately, we are expecting you to commit to providing us information about publications and grants that result and community engagement that might result from any of this funding for a 5-year period. This is part of our reporting back to NCATS. We need to be able to tell them what we've done with the money that they've so generously given us. So we will be, if you're funded, we will be chasing you up. A lot of this stuff is done automatically, and it will be just a confirmation that these are all the pieces that you've done through this funding, but we certainly want you to tell us what you're doing with the results. There are some other Frontiers pilot opportunities. There is the IAMI Trailblazer Award. The IAMI Award, IAMI is the Institute for Advancing Medical Innovation. So this is some carved out money that is there to provide investigators with early stage development of devices, drugs, and diagnostics. This is led by Scott Weir, and that's been a very successful program over the years. And then the second one that is established is the Biostatistics, Epidemiology, and Research Award, which is to help develop, specifically to develop novel statistical and epidemiological methods. And so if you have a project that meets the criteria for either of these areas, this is carved out money that will be available to you to apply for. I won't say it's less competitive, but it's competing in a smaller pool typically than is the Lauren Aronson Trailblazers funding program. The RFAs for these are usually come out in the new year. Again, they start on the same time, but the review requirements are a little bit less for these, and so that's shortens the time frame. But we will be publicizing all of these deadlines in the newsletter that Kelly Hale puts together, and they will be available on the website. As Ed said, the website should be live fairly soon, and that information will all be there, as will these slides and information on the main pilot program. Here's the information for so contact information if you need further just put together an application. You can call Frontiers, the Frontiers Central Office at the top there, or you can just reach directly out to Natalia, and she'll be able to put you in contact with specifically who you will need to gain more information for. So if you have any questions, please reach out to Natalia. As we said, these, don't expect you to write all this down. These slides will be available on through the R&D Grand Rounds website. I think that's all I had. So I'd be happy to take questions. If anybody has more details they want to know about, we can ask that.
Yes, could you talk a little bit more about the content of the themes? Are you looking for, yeah, just a little bit more about the themes that you're looking for, because it sounded like in your earlier slide, you're discussing translational research methods or a translational research project in and of itself. And I was a little confused as to what the priorities would be for funding.
Let me just get back to that slide. So these are the areas and types of studies that we are enthusiastic to support. We certainly want to support underrepresented populations, both in terms of the study participants, but also in terms of investigators. And so we take, if you identify as an underrepresented category, as per the NIH guidelines, we take that into account at the review. But these underlined bullets at the bottom are the areas where we're really, it's a balance between having a great new drug or device or a treatment approach versus how to use that to develop new tools to actually push research forward more rapidly. And that's the change that is taking place between the previous funding cycle and the new funding cycle that's just started. And so we are working towards increasing the emphasis on these sort of priority areas here.
So that could be the selection of projects could be a little bit different this time around than it was in previous cycles. Can you describe the letter of intent process? I think you described a letter of intent. Is that used to select who can subsequently apply, or could that letter of intent be used to start a conversation if somebody needed to potentially tweak their research to better map into one of these priority areas?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, certainly the letter of intent is primarily meant to winnow down all of the tens of initial applicants, letters of interest that we're receiving, down from about whatever number we get, typically 30 or 40, down to somewhere between 10 and 12, 10 or 15 finalists for whom we are going to invite to submit a full application. So that's the primary goal. I would say that is probably, certainly we have had investigators who've submitted a letter of interest, and then we have guided them towards reframing their application to make it a little bit more applicable to these criteria. But you are right, we are very interested in having the conversation, whether it is through the letter of intent or even before the letter of intent. Obviously, if you're going to write a letter of intent, it's better to know what to put in there. So we are happy to receive inquiries as to whether a particular project idea might be suitable and appropriate for this mechanism. And we want to get the best applications in. We're not trying to make it a secret. We're trying to make it as open as possible and get people to submit projects that are likely to be competitive. So it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about how to craft the application, but it's not going as far as us going out and seeking specific ideas, specific projects to be applied, which is another mechanism, other way of doing it.
And again, I'd just like to invite folks to put questions or comments into the chat or into the Q&A, and we'll try to respond to those or bring it out to the group. Dr. Leskutova or Dr. Nayak, anything to add here?
Certainly, I can jump in and elaborate a little bit on on the priority areas. And as some of you may know, that the ANCATS is shifting their priorities from the focus on the clinical translational research and more towards focusing on like generalizable, like overarching issues in translational science in general. So, and there are certain challenges that they would like to address by like a body of translational research. And those challenges are available on their website. So the potential projects that address those challenges in translational science are definitely in the ANCATS priority categories, as well as we are not really restricting the pilots to only certain types of studies and applications, and we should be able to provide early guidance on the fit of the research investigation and the programmatic fit in terms of priority areas, even before the letter of interest is submitted to a limited degree. We're definitely not going to influence the science or the approach, but we can definitely discuss how well the idea fits the priority areas of the ANCATS and the program. And as well as this type of guidance, we in the RFA when we release it, but we can share now that the letter of interest typically includes a brief description of the project, a lay abstract, and then a department letter of support is mandatory to guarantee that if funded, the investigator has support from their department for the research, and a bias sketch for the principal investigator. So this is really a very small package of materials that needs to be submitted for the letter of intent. And we do encourage everybody who's interested to reach out as early as you can, and we'll provide all assistance we can in getting a successful letter of interest submitted.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Nayak. Thanks.
Sure, sorry. Well, I don't have much to add. Just from my past 1 year experience, many times investigators reach out and they ask, particularly from partner institutes, whether their applications will be competitive. Yes, I think with my involvement here, I have seen we really try hard to encourage applications from partner institutes, so they are even very carefully evaluated, and we try to also reach out to the applicants to make them more competitive, and we encourage them to apply. Second thing, what I have seen also many times, the investigators ask whether these pilot studies, sometimes they perceive the idea that translational meaning they have to have only human studies, but no, because these are pilot in nature. So we also encourage, of course, so long the project is translational, if the animal model is developed, needed, or if it involves animal models, those are also perfectly fine. But we really encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions in mind about the scope of the grants. So all animal models, animal studies also qualify, so long it addresses a specific disease, it is translational in nature, or so those studies equally qualify. And many of these fundings we have seen in the past, we have funded also studies involving only animal experiments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if you're not used to using this format, again, I strongly recommend people clicking on the Q&A. There's a couple of questions and responses that may be of interest to you. I think one of the key things that comes out in these is the breadth of translational research and opportunities here at all with the full spectrum of clinical and translational research, including things like animal models, like Dr. Nayak suggested, to even thinking about social media as it might relate to recruiting or studying patient populations. So the full breadth. And I think that, you know, even though there's only 3 pilot grants here, I think the application process and the letter of intent process is a great way to identify a little bit more about the resources available here. And I think we have things that can actually improve a whole variety of grant applications, even beyond this pilot program. And I think that's part of what we hope, I think, Bill, is to help navigate people as we connect with people with different institutional insights to a variety of different funding opportunities or development opportunities to help improve grant applications.
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, we see our role here as facilitating investigators to move their research forward as quickly and as broadly as is appropriate. And it's our job to take the tools that we have available to us, both through the Frontiers program specifically, but also through the knowledge base we have across our and other people's institutions, and try and help identify opportunities for better collaborations going forward, and you know, using resources, whatever they may be. But yes, I want to go back to the comment that one of the Q&A questions in the Q&A was about, you know, would this include identifying new markers for identifying children impacted by adverse childhood events? I mean, I see that as exactly the sort of thing. It's a study that is in children with, presumably it's going to be targeted to some sort of traumatic event, but you could see the biomarkers being developed could be applied across multiple diseases or conditions going forward. And it's that change of thinking. It's still doing this, probably doing the same research that you would have wanted to do it, but it's thinking of the development of the tools and how they can be applied more broadly. And you know, that's part of the consultation process through the several months that we give you to apply, is to try and help investigators frame out their projects to be most competitive.
Well, great. I don't see any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So I think I want to thank our speakers, Dr. Brooks, Dr. Nayak, Dr. Loskutova, for presenting today, letting us know more about this program. And I think in the process of describing this program, understanding a little bit more about the resources that Frontiers has to offer our clinical and translational researchers. Once again, I do want to remind people to sign up, make sure that you have blocked out September 22nd on your calendar for our presentation pulling it up here, on diversity by Dr. Marie Bernard on scientific workforce diversity. So I hope you'll join us then. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Niyar.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Natalia.
you.